Nicaraguita, la flor más linda de mi querer, abonada con la bendita Nicaragüita, sangre de Tiriangen, ay Nicaragua sos más dulcita que la mielita de Tamagas. Pero ahora que ya sos libre, Nicaragüita, yo te quiero mucho más. ¡Viva Nicaragua libre! Cantando todos. Ay, Nicaragua, Nicaragüita. Este es el pueblo de Nicaragua. La flor más linda de mi querer, abonada con la bendita Nicaragüita, sangre de Viriange. Ay, Nicaragua, sos más dulcita, creciéndose, que la pielita de Tamaga. Pero ahora que ya sos libre, Nicaragüita, yo te quiero mucho más. Pero ahora que ya sos libre, Nicaragüita, yo te quiero mucho más. Que oiga el imperialismo. Ay, Nicaragua, Nicaragüita, la flor más linda de mi querer, abonada con la bendita Nicaragüita, sangre de Viriange. Ay, Nicaragua, sos más dulcita. Esa fuerza. Que la pielita de Tábara. Pero ahora que ya sos libre, Nicaragüita, yo te quiero mucho más. Pero ahora que ya sos libre, Nicaragüita, cantando, yo te quiero.
Welcome to all these people you showed up here. I think many of you are of the age that you remember those times. Certainly, and we welcome Sergio Ramírez, who's with here tonight. This meeting has been organized by the Nicaragua group. It's a part of the Latin America group, LAG, in Norway. And many of the members of this group were also very active 45 years ago. When this video was made was in 1983. That was the time that there was still some euphorism in Nicaragua for what happened in 1979. But unfortunately, in the years and the second version of the Daniel Ortega government, it has been marked by still growing human rights violations and the dictatorial regime. I'm sure Sergio will say more about this later. I will just give a brief presentation of Sergio Ramírez, who is here with us tonight. I'm sure many of you know very well who he is. Others may not know it all, but Sergio is a writer, he is a lawyer, and he is a politician. As a politician, he started at a very young age as a student to work in a movement against the Somoza dictatorship. Later he became of what was known as the Group of 12, which was a civilian and academic-based group that supported the revolutionary efforts of the Frente Sandinista. When the revolution became a fact in July 1979, Sergio Ramírez became part of the Junta de la Reconstrucción Nacional, which was the first government in Nicaragua. And after the elections in 1984, he became vice president of Nicaragua, Daniel Ortega being the president and Sergio Ramírez the vice president. Later, after the defeat of the Sandinista party in 1990, he was a parliamentarian leader in the Legislative Assembly for FSLN. As we know, as many of you know, the FSLN broke up in two factions, one led by Daniel Ortega, who stood for a more authoritarian and who came from the military part of the party, and Sergio Ramírez was very vocal on the other side that promoted a democratic development of political development in Nicaragua. But it led to the formation of a new party called Movimiento de Renovación Sandinista, MRS, who tried to challenge Ortega in the coming elections. He is presently a very vocal critic of Ortega and his present regime that has very little to do with the revolution that he was a part of during the 1980s. As an author, Sergio Ramírez has written numerous novels, essays, and poetry. He published his first works in the early 60s, and he's still writing. He's always working on a book still, and he continues publishing. He has received several distinguished literary prizes, especially the Cervantes Prize in Spain, which is the most prestigious literature prize in Spain, and similar in other countries. When Sergio Ramírez was in government, he also he invited many other writers from other countries to come to Nicaragua. And this was an important contribution to the international movement that supported the revolution at that time. Julio Cortázar, Graham Greene, and also Salman Rushdie. And I remember I was quite impressed by a book that Salman Rushdie wrote after a visit in 1986. It's called The Jaguar Smile. And in that book, he tells about his farewell dinner with Sergio Ramírez. And they both talk about the books they were writing at that time. And Sergio was saying that he tried to set aside some hours every morning to work on his novel, which was, I think, at that time, Castigo Divino. But he said, I have problems with getting on with it. I'm a little bit stuck with my writing. So Salman Rushdie said that he was writing satanic verses at that time. So he said, well, I'm in the same problem. I'm a little bit stuck, but at least I don't have to be vice president in a country at war at the same time. So Sergio Ramírez now lives in exile in Madrid with his wife Gertrudis, who is here with us tonight. And he has been stripped of his property, his citizenship, and even his university degree has been taken away from him by the Ortega regime. And I think tonight we're going to hear a little bit more about the shocking turns that this government has taken Nicaragua into. We know that there are so many international questions now dominating the agenda that it's very hard for us also to get some attention for what is going on in Nicaragua. At the moment, there are few other countries that have a more gruesome government and abuse of their citizens as Nicaragua has at the moment. So we're very happy to have you here, Sergio Ramírez, in Oslo tonight, and we look forward to your conversation with Vegard Bye and your presentation. Thank you.
Okay. My idea was to let you start first, but go ahead, please. I think you've already been introduced, so I don't need to say anything more. But you will say some words first, and then we have a conversation.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you very much for this invitation. I am very glad to be here in Norway for the third time. First, I was here was in 1986, when I was visiting the country officially under the invitation of the government of Norway, and came again in 1991. Then it is a great opportunity for me to talk to you and to give some notion of what is happening now in Nicaragua. First of all, it is very important for me to clarify this point. The present dictatorship in Nicaragua is a familiar dictatorship composed by a man and his woman that try to transmit power to or inherit power to their sons, their children. And it has anything to do with the revolution of the 80s. There are persons, there are people involved in both instances of our history, but as a historical phenomenon, they come to see very different. The revolution was the result of the insurrection of the people of Nicaragua against a dictatorship, the Somoza's family dictatorship that had ruled the country for the last 50 years in the 20th century. And it was a very spontaneous movement that was directed by the Sandinist Front of National Liberation, but that had the participation of different sections of the population of Nicaragua on different social classes. In 1990, we lost elections. We call a free election, and we lost it. And we didn't have any doubt to give power to the party of the alliance of party that had won that election, headed by Mrs. Violeta Chamorro, was the candidate of for the presidency of the opposition at that moment. I'd like to say that there was two great moments for the history of Nicaragua and two great moments for the Sandinist Front. In July 1979, when we won the revolution, when we entered Managua triumphantly, after the defeat of the Somoza dictatorship. And the second great moment was when we give the power we have conquered by arms, by the force of the vote. It has completed this cycle for the first time in the history of Nicaragua, and for the first time, I believe, in the history of Latin America, when another movement, a guerrilla movement, conceded the power through a free election. And then the revolutionary movement, the revolutionary period for the history of Nicaragua dissolved in 1990. Because what came thereafter was very different. Starting for the election of Ortega in, I don't remember the 2006, yeah. Yes. Ortega was elected again, not because he has the majority of the votes of the population. He won the election with 35% of the vote, just because the constitution was reformed in order to permit, to allow Ortega to win the election with a range of vote, lower range of votes, because there was a corrupt pact with the leader of the right-wing party, the Liberal Party, Arnoldo Alemán, who was under the threat of going to jail for corruption, and because Ortega has an enormous power on the judiciary in Nicaragua, this pact permitted Alemán to be free of any judicial process, and Ortega to become president of the Republic again. And because he had the support of another corrupt character in the history of Nicaragua, Monsignor Miguel Obando Bravo, who was first the great enemy of the Sandinist front, and in that moment was the great supporter of Daniel Ortega. And third, because the financial capital supported Ortega. Those were the three bases in which the new presidency was supported. The financial capital, the Catholic bishop under the direction of...
Actually, cardinal. It was a cardinal, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah. the cardinal, yes. And the pact, the corrupt pact with Alemán. It is the base of this new power, this familiar power that had anything to do with any revolutionary idea. Rhetorically, it is a left-wing government. In reality, it is a right-wing government. Everything this dictator does resembled for me Mussolini, for example, and the worst right-wing governments in the history of Latin America. And
something happened to the sound.
no sé. Should I start again?
I think we heard you until now. This doesn't work at all?
I was part of the revolution. I was a protagonist of the revolutions. My life is part of that revolution, the life of my family. I was deeply involved in what is happening in Nicaragua. I never regret what I did then. If I will have again the age I had then, I will do the same thing exactly. It is difficult to compare dictatorships. This dictatorship is perhaps worst than the Somoza's family dictatorship. First, everyone has fear in Nicaragua. Perhaps someone wanted to come here to this conversation with me, but had familiars in Nicaragua, had relatives in Nicaragua, and perhaps had the fear that the simple presence of someone here can affect his relatives in Nicaragua. That is terrible. That never happened under Somoza. I am not defending the Somoza dictatorship, of course. It was a criminal dictatorship. But today, Somoza had never occurred to Somoza to reform the constitution, to designate himself and his wife co-presidents of the country. This is a complete aberration, and it's what is happening in Nicaragua today. The constitution has been reformed in order to create this bicephal government in which Ortega and his wife have the co-presidents of the country. The independent powers have been in this new constitution abolished completely. There is any judiciary power or legislative power, but all of them are only tentacles of the head that is over there, the presidency, in which the constitution literally say coordinate all branches of government, judiciary branch, legislative branch, and so on. The independence of power has completely disappeared in the constitution of the country. There is an enormous amount of repression, fear, I repeat. What happened in 8 years ago is one of the worst thing that could have been happening in Nicaragua, the death of more than 400 people under the bullets of the dictatorship, and 1 million of Nicaragua living out of the country now. It's the 20% of the population living out of the country. That is the actual panorama of Nicaragua.
Okay, does this work? Yeah. Okay. I think you should keep your microphone in case. Thank you, Sergio. It is really, I think it hurts us to hear your remarks about how you lived through this. So what we are going to do now is to try to talk us through some of the key moments and key questions. How did we end up where we are now? And my first question is about the man who is claiming power in the country, Daniel Ortega. You worked very close to him. You were his deputy. I suppose you also knew him all the time from when he was released from prison, although he was in hiding. But I suppose you were already at that time in touch with him. It's important to say that he was one of 9 commandantes. I don't know exactly what happened when he was chosen as a candidate in '84 to be president. But my question to you is, did you at that time, working closer to him, have any feeling that this man had more of a dictatorship with him and than a Democrat? Did you sense already at that time that he had doubts about democracy?
Well, it is difficult to say because first it's very important to remember how power was organized in Nicaragua in the 80s. The Standing Front was the result of the merging of three different tendencies that fought against the army of Somoza separately and were united only in the last months before the triumph of the revolution. The unifying of the Standing Front was given in April, May, and the revolution triumphed in July. And then there was a political equilibrium fixed by circumstances, because the three tendencies in which the Standing Front was divided composed the national directorate of the Standing Front, 3 members for each tendency to a total of 9 members. Then there was this equilibrium. No one had the absolute power, but the power was controlled by this national directorate. And Ortega was only a primus inter pares in this body. No one in single terms which accused at that moment dictatorial tendencies. It was impossible because the revolution was a project, the revolution has a program, the revolution was in the building of the army, in the building of the police, in the building of the government itself, changing completely the rules of how the country was going to be governed. When in 1984 Ortega was elected candidate for the presidency, when I was round with him for the vice presidency, the situation had not changed. Ortega continues to be a primus inter pares, and I suppose he was chosen as candidate because he was the one that represented less danger at that moment to becoming a very strong character in this representation of power in Nicaragua, and because he had the support of his brother, who was the chief of the army, Humberto Ortega, who died practically in prison.
So what you're saying is that the fact that these two brothers could coordinate the execution of power was what really gave Daniel Ortega so much power internally in the Dirección Nacional. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, but this power disappeared completely after the election of 1990.
Yeah.
Because the Standing Front has enormous bureaucratic apparatus, hundreds of people working for the party, in a national way. And this apparatus was financed by the government. And when we lost the government, we lost the possibility of financing the party. Yeah. And then the party completely, the bureaucracy of the party completely disappeared. Yeah. And Ortega was isolated because he didn't have even the control of the legislative group in the National Assembly.
Can you tell us what happened in the night between the election night and until the morning? Because what we understood, we who tried to follow this from the outside, there was doubts inside the Dirección. Should they accept the election result or not?
No, any doubt. There was a immediate decision when we knew the first polls. We have organized a poll system to know ahead which the results of the election were going to be. And we'll see that the tendency was against us and was an irreversible tendency. We call a meeting of the National Directorate, and everyone accepted the results. And the only resolution was to call President Carter, who was there as an observer of the election, to mediate with Mrs. Chamorro to start the process of transferring the government.
I've heard one version. You may confirm or not this version. That it has been said that Jimmy Carter personally took upon him to talk to Daniel Ortega and convince him about the necessity of accepting the defeat, even saying, "I know how it is to lose an election." That isn't true.
But not to convince Ortega of accepting the results. I was present at that meeting, and the only thing we asked President Carter was to go to Mrs. Chamorro, and the comment of President Carter was a spontaneous one, to say, "Don't feel so bad. I lost an election, and I believed it was the end of the war." And it wasn't the end of the war, Carter said.
Yeah. It's important to remember that when Jimmy Carter became president in the US, he was the one who cut off the support of Somoza. So in a way, maybe that was an important element for the triumph of the revolution. So in a way, he had a certain stake in the fall of Somoza, I would say.
Well, what the Carter administration was trying to do was to facilitate the change of government in the more institutional terms. The United States under Carter didn't want a violent change of hands of power in Nicaragua, but an orderly one. They wanted the Bishop Obando to receive the presidential band from the hands of Somoza and to keep with him this band, and then to give the band to the member of the new junta de Reconstrucción Nacional. This is based on all political conviction of Washington in respect to Latin America, which is what they call search of stability. See, to give stability to the situation in Central America, being so close to the borders of the United States, not to disturb the situation. It was a revolution, of course, an armed revolution. We were not there to superficially change things, but to change them deeply.
Yeah.
This is what a revolution is about.
The president who came after Jimmy Carter thought differently, though, but we come back to that. When you talk about Ortega and his character as a dictator, what do you think created it? What was the reason for this complete change of character? Was it a personalistic thing, or had it to do with political circumstances?
Power. I think I prefer to see my characters as novelists better than a politician. You understand them better. I don't deny that Ortega has revolutionary ideals at the beginning. All of those had that kind of revolutionary ideals. But he was transforming himself in a different person. The hungry for power. It is an element through history and through literature. You can find everywhere. And once he was alone in the before being elected president again. The only support he had was the support of his wife, and he demonstrated this political support to him when the stepdaughter of Ortega accused him of violation and sexual abuses, and she gave then Ortega full support against her own
Daughter. Yeah.
Then it was in that very decisive moment he changed political power for the love of his of her daughter.
So that explains the tremendous power today exercised by
That
Rosario
explains
Murillo.
everything, many things, not everything. That explains many things.
Yeah.
This support she gave then his husband in detriment of her own daughter.
And I can testify, I happen to know her ex-husband, and I know how terrible the abuse of power took place. And I know that at a certain moment, she with her ex-husband decided we have to go public with this. And that was when the story broke.
Yeah, once you have absolute power, you want to defend this power, and the only way you believe it, you have to defend this power is to having more power and more power and more power. If you diminish, you're hungry for power, you are lost.
Would you say that Rosario Murillo today is more powerful than Daniel Ortega?
She's very ambitious. She's very ambitious. You heard his speeches, declarations, and like in many novels, she believes he's going to be eternal.
Can we go back to the election in 1990? I think the majority of Nicaraguans, or at least in the political system, and also we journalists, we were very surprised that you lost the election. I know that there are somebody here in this audience who thought otherwise. What do you think was the reason why you lost the election? Was it the military service? Was it the war?
Well, the war in a general sense, the war. The singularity was to call an election in a situation of war, terrible war, with all the consequences a war brings to a country. Poverty, lack of food, the military service, the people was against the military service, was exhausted by the military service. And then even in these circumstances, we believe that we can win that election because we decided in France it was a kind of arrogance. We represented the people. We were the party of the people. How can we lose an election?
Actually, this is, as you know, an issue today in Ukraine. I think the Vice President Vance tried to tell the President of Ukraine that you should have elections. And the quite unanimous response from at least the Western countries was that there is no way you can have elections during war. You did it, and you lost.
Yes. And when we had 40% of the vote. This is a lot under the war.
But then I also had to come back to the situation we had in the 1990s with the war. And there is no doubt, at least in my mind, that this war was to a large extent the creation of the US and the support to the Contras. I have even said in one of my books that the Contras, they were created in the first instance by the Americans, by the CIA. How important was the US policy under Reagan as an explanation of what happened afterwards? Was this also the basis for the destruction of the whole dream of the revolution, leading up to what you have today? What is the historic responsibility of the U.S.?
Well, I think Reagan was not merely trying to defeat the Sunni Front in the battlefield. He was trying to defeat the Soviet Union in the worldwide range of power of the Cold War. And he considered that Nicaragua was part, as a piece of a piece of the interests of the Soviet Union in Latin America, because as a consequence of the support the Reagan administration was giving to the Contras army, we were giving support on the part of the United States militarily. The army in Nicaragua and the recruits were fighting with arms that came from the Soviet Union. And even when we didn't want such a thing, we were part of the Cold War.
But would you say that the Americans were right in saying that this was the beginning of the new dictatorship? Or would you say that they rather built the basis for a new dictatorship by destroying the country through war?
The United States never will allow an army Marxist, that they said, revolution to be successful in Central America. And they applied this formula against Nicaragua and against El Salvador and against Guatemala. They didn't want any kind of armed revolution. Since the 1954, when they overthrow President Arbenz in Guatemala, the political had not changed till the 80s.
But the argument was this is in order to defend democracy. That was the argument of the Reagan administration. Would you say that the consequence was the contrary? That there is a link between the war in the 1980s and what you have in Nicaragua today?
Well, in Nicaragua, this Trump administration is not interested in what happened in Nicaragua at all.
No, I'm referring to the emergence of the new dictatorship under Ortega.
Referring to?
The emergence of the new dictatorship under Ortega. Was that in any way the consequence of a country that had been destroyed by war?
I don't believe so. No.
Let me go on to another question that is, I'm here, one of your favorite books, Adios Muchachos. You said yesterday that this may be your favorite book, at least one of them. And in this in my view, an account, a very bittersweet account, bitter and also at the same time romantic, personal testimony of your participation in this project. And you asked yourself in the introduction here a very important question. ¿Valió la pena? A fin de cuentas. O sea, was it really worth it? Was the revolution worth it?
Yes, of course. I said before that if I had the same age that I had then, I would repeat. I will do again the same thing. Will participate in a revolution that tried to overthrow a dictatorship in Nicaragua. I had 30 years. Today, I couldn't participate in any insurrection against any dictatorship. I can only talk, but not participate. And the situation in Nicaragua is completely different now.
Because you say here, and I translate to English, in 1999, when this was published, in spite of all the disappointments, it continues, the revolution continues to give me gratifications. This was in 1999. What do you say today?
The revolution, yes. I received gratifications from that time. To have had the opportunity to participate in such a crusade, popular crusade, like the one we live in Nicaragua. I was referring yesterday that I came from, I was living in Germany in the 70s. I had a fellowship as a writer and in West Berlin. I lived there for 2 years. And in 1975, I decided to return to Nicaragua because of the revolution. Because I had the offer to go to France and to work. The new Pompidou Center was recently opened in Paris. My reflection was that I am sad only to think that I could have learned about the triumph of the revolution through the pages of Le Monde in Paris, and not to have been a part of that revolution. Then this is one of those gratifications, to know that I was there, that participated.
After 1990, I think it was in 94, 95, you were running as a candidate for an alternative Sandinista party, the MRS, the movement for Sandinista renovation. You lost. Actually, I think you had no chance. Why was it so impossible to construct a new Sandinista party, democratic party, against maybe what already then was in the beginning of a new dictatorship?
It was 30 years ago, the last time I was active in politics. Well, there was an enormous polarization in Nicaragua. Let's see. It was the traditional Sandinist front with Ortega as a candidate that was a returning of the Sandinismo, the traditional Sandinismo. And on the other hand, it was Arnoldo Alemán, representative of the right-wing forces and of the Liberal Party, that was the old party of Somoza. Then the polarization was open between Somozismo and Sandinismo, traditional Sandinismo. Then we appeared with an offer to the electorate, a third way, that didn't work amidst this tremendous polarization. We started to have support. We started with 14–18% of the vote, and then we were systematically losing this support till we could elect one representative to the National Assembly only, and to win only one municipality in all the country.
If you move to the present situation, of course, everybody, and I think many of this audience, will ask yourself, how can things move into different directions in Nicaragua? How can you get rid of the dictatorship? I suppose you have no silver bullet to answer this question, but what are your thoughts about a possible new future for Nicaragua?
It's difficult to answer for me that question, because when you live in exile, you lost the perspective that what's happening inside the country, and the only resonance I receive from my own country is silence now, silence, fear. And everyone I know is out of the country, writers, journalists, politicians, living in Costa Rica, in the United States, in Spain. Nobody is there. If I returned to Nicaragua, hypothetically today, that wouldn't be my country. It is a kind of North Korean regime. This is too much to say. This is like North Korea. Everything is under control. You can make a live there. How to change this? Only with people inside the country.
Well, there are people there.
That is what of course, we are only 1 million out of the country. There are 5 million living in Nicaragua. Of course, what people think, I really don't know.
No, but I mean, there must be a tremendous, issue for those of you in the exile to ask, how can we get rid of this terrible regime? You still have dreams about your country.
Well, the only thing I can do is to support young people.
Young people.
To support young people, not to participate. That will be tremendously absurd that I will present myself now in Nicaragua as a political alternative at my age. No, you must support young people. New generation had to carry on the changes in Nicaragua.
What led to the revolution was armed struggle. Is armed struggle still an alternative in Latin America and Nicaragua?
Armed struggle, no. In nothing Latin America, nothing Nicaragua. I think nobody is going to wanted now to pay the price of a new civil war in Nicaragua.
But what can young people today learn from you, the historic experience you had? What can I learn from you if they have, and I suppose young people still have dreams, and they want to create a new Nicaragua? What can I learn from your experiences?
Well, that the failures in history are never definitive. You can try again. You can try again. You must try again. And I will support anyone that would try to change things in Nicaragua. And I say it with enormous hope. I have the hope things are going to change, of course.
One hypothesis is, of course, what happens if Daniela Ortega dies before Rosario Murillo? Will she be able to maintain power, to keep the loyalty of the armed forces and the police, and to continue ruling the country?
No, I don't believe so. I believe that if such a thing will happen today or tomorrow, with the opposition out of Nicaragua, I think the army is going to take power. Because there is the only institution in the country that is organized enough to fill a vacuum of power.
But does
this is not what I want. I only signaling you the reality of the situation, because nobody is going to say call all the opposition that is out of the country to share power. Here is the power for the opposition. Nobody is going to do that. And you must count on the real forces inside the country. One of them is the army.
Do you have any idea of the thoughts in the younger ranks, like the colonel generation in the armed forces? What do you think? Do you think they will have any alternative project, political project?
I really don't know.
I think nobody knows.
No, nobody knows. Nobody knows. But always inside the army, there is people that want changes. That is part of the reality of history. Yeah.
The last question I want to ask you now, and you will get the opportunity afterwards to also ask questions to Sergio Ramírez. But the last question I have to you now is, I mean, we are living in a terrible world. There are so many tragedies. Nicaragua is just one, and so far away, and so little attention being paid to what is happening in Nicaragua. I'm very happy to see so many people here tonight, actually, because Nicaragua is outside of the radar screen. How can we manage to provide a little bit more attention to what is happening in Nicaragua? You are writing books, maybe that is one way, but how can we achieve that this tragedy becomes more is given more attention in the media, in the political movements around the world?
I think one of the things that should be put ahead is the massive violation of human rights in Nicaragua, like it is described in the reports of the Human Rights Commissions of the United Nations. Massacres, killing, people in jail, people in exile, for example, the suppression of the citizenship for 500 Nicaraguans, that include me, a strip of the right of citizenship, that is a flagrant violation of a basic human right, which is the right to citizenship. That nobody is saying anything, any government, about it. Then first enters the foreign affairs, the foreign minister in the European governments in such things, violation of human rights. I recognize that Nicaragua is not a strategic country. It is a very marginal country, economically, politically. When you think in Latin America, you think first in Venezuela, for example, because Venezuela is a very rich country, oil, minerals, rare earth, and so on. And the United States and the European countries pay attention to what is happening, relatively, what is happening in Venezuela. It doesn't has to do with Maduro stalling elections. But Venezuela is in the focus of attention, not Nicaragua. You won't put Nicaragua back in the map of attention.
Let's hope that will happen. Thank you so far.
Thank you very much.
We are now going to play a video. Yesterday I made an interview with Carlos Fernando Chamorro, which we'll see here. Do you want to sit here, or do you want to?
Yes, you're going to see the video.
Yeah.
It's the only way is
so,
sitting there.
Thanks so far. Yeah. Carlos Fernando Chamorro, muy buenas tardes.
How are you, Vegard? Mucho gusto. Nice to see you again.
Es un poco extraño hablar en el idioma gringo, pero no hay forma de evitarlo. So we do this in English, Carlos.
Okay.
I want to take you back to the first time we met. That was actually on the 10th of January, 1979, in the offices of La Prensa in Managua. This was the first anniversary of the death of your father, who had been, by all likelihood, murdered on the order of the dictator Somoza. Can you give us a very brief account of your quite unique journalistic travel from that period in '79 until today, Carlos?
Well, this was a moment of deep pain and at the same time hope in my life, before and after my father has had been assassinated a year ago in Nicaragua. My father was a prominent citizen, editor, intellectual, politician, anti-dictatorship fighter, and pro-democracy fighter. And he was gone. He was assassinated by people directly related with the Somoza dictatorship, and that provoked in Nicaragua an explosion, a national explosion, a national protest, a moment of anger. And that also changed the country forever, and it changed my life too. I was at the time an economist. I had recently graduated, and I wanted to continue my graduate studies. So I was working in Nicaragua for a year to get experience. But at that time, I took a decision that changed my life. Number one, I went into journalism, which is something that I had never planned into my head, because for some reason, I was some kind of censored myself, because my father was a prominent journalist. I just didn't want to live under his shadow. I loved him very much. I admired him, but I never thought about it. But I decided to go into journalism as a tool for change. My father was the owner of La Prensa, the most important Nicaraguan institution, and I thought that I had to be there in order to have some kind of an influence for the process of change, to get rid of the Somoza dictatorship that Nicaragua was going through. Number two, I put away my plans to become an academic, an economist, a professional economist. I forgot about going to study abroad. And number three, I went into politics. I decided to get involved in the conspiracy politics, in the underground politics of the Sandinista Liberation Front to get rid of the Somoza dictatorship. That implied a strategy of combining political and military actions and promoting an insurrection to get rid of the dictatorship. So that was my life at that point. I didn't have time enough to grieve my personal pain, but I got involved in politics. I got involved in journalism, and that's when we met in 1979.
But then you combined your political activism also with journalism in the service of the revolution, from the triumph of the revolution in July 79. How was that? I mean, how did you manage to combine your journalistic credentials with a job to defend a revolution that was, after all, quite controversial?
Well, at that time, I went through that process, and I thought it was kind of something that could be done, that I could be both a political militant and at the same time a journalist. And we tried to do the best newspaper that could be possible, but at the same time under the restrictions of a political party and a political strategy. I think we failed. I think it was very difficult to do both things at the same time, and journalism suffered the political imperative of politics. But there was something that I thought at that moment that was bigger, and that bigger thing was the attempt to help and to promote political and social transformation in Nicaragua. So that was my decade in politics and journalism with the FSLN during the Sandinista revolution. That lasted more than a decade. When the FSLN lost the elections in 1990, actually, it was Daniel Ortega was defeated by my mother, Violeta Chamorro, who was the leader of the opposition. I took another decision that was also very important. I decided to promote the depoliticization, departidization of the newspaper Barricada. I said the only way the newspaper can survive in a transition to democracy, in a political transition, is if it really becomes autonomous, and to establish deep roots with the readers. So we started that process to create out of Barricada a professional newspaper in which we journalists will decide about the news and about editorial decisions and not the party. Well, the party did not like that decision, and 3 years later I was kicked out. I was expelled from the newspaper, and from then on, from 1995, I started a new life as an independent journalist. So this is part of my experience and my life. I learned from my experience, and I also learned from my errors in this new process that I started in 1995.
And then you became what we used to call an investigative journalist. And your new, I think you studied Confidencial already at that time, becoming a very important tool to, for instance, research the problem of corruption in Nicaragua, etc. And I think you went both ways, both against your own comrades and also against those who took up power and came into power later on. And then, of course, you had developed this into a situation where you became, I would say, the most hated man from the President Ortega today. That actually started many years ago. So how is it today, Carlos, to do journalism from exile? This is the second time you have to go into exile. You are living in a neighboring country. It's a very difficult situation to get sources inside Nicaragua to speak freely. How is it possible to do journalism from exile?
Let me try to fill the time gap between 1996, when I founded Confidencial, and 2025, when now I am in exile, being persecuted by the Ortega dictatorship. When I founded Confidencial was in a moment of transition in Nicaragua with a booming civil society, and we thought that the freedom of the press and freedom of expression were universal rights that we have conceived, and they were permanent. But in 2007, Daniel Ortega came back to power. I had been doing journalism for more than 15 years, overseeing power, investigating corruption from different governments. When Ortega came to power, it was a different situation because he declared the independent press the enemy. He decided to concentrate power, to promote electoral fraud, and also to eliminate any kind of counterbalance of power, either it was the media, civil society, or whatever. And I became a target of the Ortega's attack since very early, since the year 2007, when he started power. So we investigated Ortega's corruption during more than a decade, and to some extent, there was some kind of, let's say, toleration. The government blocked us, the government spied on us, the government simply didn't allow us to have any access to public sources, but we could publish everything we wanted. Everything changed since 2018, when there was in Nicaragua an explosion, a new explosion like the one that happened in 1979 when my father was assassinated. This was a different thing, but there were some, let's say, common elements. People were completely tired of repression, tired of injustice, tired of corruption. And there was this explosion and a civic insurrection, not an armed insurrection, a civic insurrection that put Ortega on the verge of losing power. At that moment, he launched a brutal attack against Nicaraguan society, and that included us, journalists, university students, peasants, business leaders, intellectuals, former Sandinista, let's say, leaders, and many other people. And that was the result of repression. We have been living in Nicaragua under a police state since 2018 until 2025. It's been 7 years under a police state that eliminated all democratic freedoms in Nicaragua, including electoral freedom, freedom of the press, religious freedom. So since 2021, I had forced to leave Nicaragua and to stay in exile in Costa Rica to preserve my freedom. Otherwise, I will be in prison now. I would be in prison like many other people that had been in prison. And I decided that I needed to be free in order to do journalism, in order to continue fighting the dictatorship and fighting censorship. And this is what I've been doing since 2021. Now, the big thing, the big difference, Vegard, is that it's not just myself, it's not just a journalist that is facing an emergency, it's that my whole newsroom and all Nicaraguan independent press is in exile. Otherwise, we will all be in prison. Now, how do we work from exile? That's a different story.
Can you say something about that? I know that, for instance, for people to speak to you, although it's, without giving the names, it's very complicated. People are afraid. Maybe you are even putting people in danger by exposing their views without giving them names. So how do you go about that?
Well, there is a situation of criminalization of freedom of opinion and of expression in Nicaragua, and therefore, as you are saying, our sources are criminalized. Therefore, we have to protect them. We have to protect their identity in anonymity. We have to provide for them secure channels of communications. We have sources within the government. We have sources within the government that allow us to break stories about government corruption, about government internal purges against military people or ministers and others. And these are like the big stories of what is happening in Nicaragua. This is a very centralized family dictatorship that that has imposed a system of total control in the country. And the only window that is still open for society is the press in exile. I mean, we are capable to distribute the content of our information thanks to the internet and social media to the Nicaraguan audience. Nicaraguan people are defeating censorship because of the reports that we are producing from exile. They cannot talk about it. They cannot distribute that information because that's a crime, and that will put them in danger and in prison. And we continue to report. It's very, very difficult. It's also very expensive to sustain and to make sustainable a whole media organization in exile when our advertisers have also been criminalized. So we have to face the challenge of protecting our sources, producing credible information by corroborating with 2, 3, 4 times, and at the same time trying to be economically sustainable.
How effective is the internet control in Nicaragua today? How can ordinary people in Nicaragua, for instance, tune into your YouTube's emissions and read your newsletter? Is that possible without being detected and be exposing themselves to repression?
Well, contrary to Cuba or China, internet providers in Nicaragua are not state providers, are private companies. And that's what permits up to this moment for us to distribute our content through internet and through social media. Social media is monitored by the government. They monitor what you say, but they cannot intervene about what you are consuming, what you are reading, or what you are watching. I don't know for how long. The government recently eliminated the domain .ni, which means Nicaragua. This domain was under the administration of the National Engineering University. And we pay our duties, but from one day to another, they canceled the domain selectively for some independent media, including Confidencial, the one that I direct. So we changed from confidencial.com.ni to confidencial.digital. And we are preparing to other attempts to blockade internet, because this is the last reserve of information and this is the last reserve of freedom.
Do you have an idea of how many people in Nicaragua can read you or see you on YouTube? How far do you reach in Nicaragua today?
Well, of our total audience, about 50 to 60% are reading us and are watching us in Nicaragua. And then about 20% in the States, about 10% in Costa Rica and other Central American countries. That implies something, several dozens of thousands every day. People who are watching videos and who are also reading our stories.
Carlos, we are living in a world where there is no lack of terrible news. There is no lack of the attack on the most basic human rights, the most basic humanitarian needs, and the most basic lack of political freedom. Nicaragua tends to fall outside of the radar screen. There are so many other things we must be we are worried about. How can we really make sure that Nicaragua is not being forgotten, that we can continue paying attention to the terrible regime we are living under in Nicaragua?
I'm making a call to the international press to keep Nicaragua in the radar. There are not foreign correspondents in Nicaragua anymore, Vegard. No one from any wire services or from any foreign media, they're not allowed to get into Nicaragua, but they can report the story. So what I am urging is to my colleagues internationally, first in Central America, in Latin America, in the US, in Europe, in the Nordic countries, is to keep telling the story of a country which represents a story of resistance. It's a silent resistance at this moment. People cannot go out to the street and protest, but they are resisting and they are migrating massively. And there's stories about corruption. There are stories about hope, about a church that is under persecution. Now, we as journalists are, let's say, writing the first draft of this big story, but we need an amplifying channels in the international media, in civil society worldwide, in order to keep Nicaragua in the center of the radar. The crisis in Nicaragua is also, it has a regional consequence, a regional dimension for the rest of Central America. It's not just one country. It's a country that also has become kind of an instrument of Russia, of Putin policy in Central America, and it's also building an economic alliance with China. Ortega, it's basically an instrument of foreign powers, and it has an implication also for the rest of Central America. Nicaragua requires to recover our national sovereignty. It requires to recover basic freedom. It requires to eliminate the police state in order to call for new free elections and to go through a democratic political transition, and to allow hundreds of thousands of Nicaragua like myself that have been obliged to go into exile and to migrate, to come back to our country under guarantees of safety and security.
You mentioned that the opposition is silent. How do you see the way forward? Do you see any sign that this dictatorship can come to an end? How do you believe that a new tomorrow can be created?
I think this dictatorship is not sustainable, but I cannot make a prediction about when will it fall and how. I can only say that they have been reducing the sources of support and sustainability. The polls that are still being done in Nicaragua from abroad, they will show you a tendency of a deep reduction of the political support of Daniel Ortega, Rosario Murillo, and their dictatorship, probably around 8 to 15% of the population are supporting them, and a large majority demand a change. Now, that cannot be translated in political action because there are no political parties in Nicaragua legal. They're all illegal. There's no civil society in Nicaragua. It has been completely eliminated. That's why I talk about silent resistance. And silent resistance starts with information and freedom of consciousness. What will be the how do you say, the detonante? How do you see, what will be the sparking thing that will produce change? It could be several things, but there are different, the leadership of Nicaraguan opposition abroad is working in preparation, let's say, for the day after, for a new political transition in Nicaragua. Part of this process has to do with the internal deterioration of the family dictatorship in power that has been concentrating too much power that again, now they are in the process of devouring their own supporters, no matter who they are. It could be Humberto Ortega, the brother of Daniel Ortega, former chief of the army. He died as a political prisoner. And very important, let's say, cadres of the army, the police, and the FSLN has also been separated by the control of this family in power in Nicaragua. So it is not possible to make a prediction, but I believe the Nicaraguans are being prepared for a political transition, and the world should be attentive and watch this process that will take place sooner than later.
Muchas gracias, Carlos. Espero que algún día, aunque seamos ahora hombres viejos, algún día nos volveremos a ver en Managua.
Gracias, Vegard. I want to take advantage of this opportunity to invite your audience to subscribe to our newsletter, The Dispatch, to stay informed on what is happening in Nicaragua. It's a weekly English language newsletter. You can see now how to subscribe it in your screens. And also, if you want to make a donation to Confidencial, well, independent journalism is under threat, and we need your support to keep working and to keep reporting from exile. We count with your support.
I think you also have a channel on YouTube, right?
Yes, our YouTube channel is called Confidencial YouTube, Confidencial Nica in YouTube. Yes, thank you.
Muchas gracias, Carlos. Suerte para ti, tu familia y toda la nación nicaragüense. Hasta luego.
Gracias, Vegard. Un abrazo.
Un abrazo. Chao, chao. Okay, great. I think that was, we spent exactly half an hour, and that's okay.
Okay. Puedes cortar lo que necesite. Okay.
Muchas gracias, Carlos.
Chao.
Chao.
Okay. We'll take a little break while Sergio comes back to the podium. But please don't leave the venue. I hope you will continue being here. But I think many people find it a little bit hot to be here. Maybe there's some water out in the hallway if somebody needs a glass of water. But please don't leave.
Er det det? Ok.
We did not intend to ask you to leave the room. Does this work? Spørsmål fra salen? Nei? Vi tør ikke det, men spørsmål fra salen, så det ikke noe. Hans Petter? Hans Petter? So before you all leave the room, so if you can sit down, please. The idea is now you have the opportunity to ask questions to Sergio Ramírez. Unfortunately, Carlos is no more present. We had to do it to tape it because he was going. He was leaving Costa Rica yesterday, and so you can ask questions to Sergio Ramírez. I think he can also answer questions that came up during the interview with Carlos. So please, Hans Petter has a microphone. Frode Rekve is the first.
Dear friends, it's nice to be here tonight, and it has been very interesting to hear some of these explanations and analysis of what went wrong in Nicaragua. And Vegard here and many of us others have spent a lot of time, years in Central America, and especially in Nicaragua. The Frente Sandinista had all the Scandinavian youth, nearly all of them, grabbed by with red scarves. We were all Sandinista friends. We went thousands to Nicaragua to work in working armies. We supported, you had support from the whole world. It was a popular revolution. Everything went wrong. You're now in exile, all of you, all the heroes. You can't just blame Daniel Ortega. What went wrong? Why did everything after the so romantic revolution so successful revolution, so popular revolution in Nicaragua? What went wrong? What is your self-explanation? What did you do wrong? Why didn't you succeed?
Well, there are many, could be many explanations. I put before me those questions in my book, Adiós Muchachos, to try to explain where were the main failures of a revolution such the one we have in Nicaragua. Well, first, I think that it's very important that an armed revolution was at the same time a romantic revolution. A guerrilla movement was a romantic movement, and with this romantic view of politics, we came first into the power. There was ideology too. I think the imperant ideology at that moment was Marxism. In Nicaragua, there was a combination between Marxism and Christianism. The Eurasian Church has enormous influence in Nicaragua by then. But we were very young. Very young by then.
Okay.
Then these three elements, the romantic guerrilla that came to power without any experience, under a very strong ideology that was Marxism, and at the same time this configuration between Marxism and avant-garde Catholicism with the Church of Liberation and so on. And a very young revolution made by young people that first we believe we can change things in Nicaragua only by the force of our will, without taking into consideration the reality of the country. And I would add to it that the revolution wanted to transform economically and socially the country without thinking much in democracy. For us, the priority was the necessary changes in the economic and social order, and not to establish in Nicaragua a democratic system like the one we had at the end of the 10 years, because we were forced by the war to call elections, and we accepted the result of the elections. And this heroic movement, like the one that was the Sandinist Front, dissolved after the defeat of 1990 into nothing. And one the worst disadvantage of them was that many of the leaders of the revolution participated in corrupted acts, taking property of the state, property that had been nationalized for their own means, for their own benefit. Decision of the Sandinist Front started when we, a group of Sandinistas, reclaimed to Ortega and the leadership of the revolution to bring to the judiciary courts those who were responsible of act of corruption. We were never heard. And it was of the reason why we were to organize a different political movement. And because of corruption, and because we believed then that the only way the Sandinist Front could return to power was through organizing itself as a real political power, a competitive political power that could appeal again to the favor of the population because we had lost this favor. We were a minority. And since then, the Sandinist Front was always in minority. I was explaining you before, Ortega won the election the election through manipulations, not because the Sandinist Front had conquered the majority of the votes again. Those will be some elements I would like to say.
Thank you. I think there are a couple of other, one over here. Microphone, okay, start there.
I will speaking in Spanish. I want, this is...
Está bien.
Okay. No creo que sea ningún castigo divino lo que le ha llevado a que decida o diga adiós a los muchachos. Tengo una duda. ¿Cómo se hace para decir adiós a los grandes ideales? ¿Cómo se hace para abandonar, para renegar, para rechazar todos esos ideales de juventud y llegar a una etapa de la vida en donde el motivo de existencia, la razón de existencia, sea combatir y denostar todo lo que uno ha defendido en la juventud, la etapa más linda y más noble de nuestra existencia? ¿Cómo se hace para pasar de la política a la demonología y terminar acabando, sepultando las grandes ilusiones y obsesionado con las grandes desilusiones de los tiempos? ¿Cómo se hace?
I don't
So
know.
the question is, how can you go about it to say adios muchachos? To put all the dreams behind you.
I really don't know because I really don't know who is he talking about. It's not me. I have not abandoned any idea of my job. I am always the same. If not to abandon an ideal of job is to support a terrible dictatorship like the one we're living in Nicaragua, that would be a terrible thing to do. Perhaps he's talking about a different person. I really don't know.
There is one question here. Okay, sorry.
Yes.
Sorry.
Thank you. I just want to talk about the detonante, la chispa. What could make a difference in the future for Nicaragua? Because you had these insurrections in 2018 when it was a reform, a pension reform that caused it. Because in Nicaragua, many of the youngsters are very dependent on what the older generation are earning for their studying or work, or to have money at all. So you had these big insurrections, and they lasted for more or less a week. You had these general strike, and you had farmers blocking the roads. You had different ways doing, showing how and doing an insurrection, and then and a year later you had more of a quiet way of making opposition, and it was these old ladies during the Day of the Mothers in May. You have the Day of the Mothers. They went in black because they wanted to protest because their children had been dying, and this was their quiet way of showing that they was in opposition to the regime. And I wonder, what can we expect, and is it possible that you can get a new revolution against the old revolutionary hero that is now so like a more or less a Dracula? They call him the Dracula because he's not out in the daylight because of some kind of skin disease. So
yeah. I think you got the question before, but you can try once again to respond.
Yes, really there was a national insurrection, an insurrection of the youth, especially. Made the blockade of the roads, the barricades in the streets, but a difference of what happened in 1979, when you had blocking of the roads, you had barricades and closing the street, and you have a national insurrection. The one then was an armed insurrection, and this we're talking now about was an insurrection without arms. A pacific insurrection, I would say, a national resistance, more than a struggle, armed struggle. And he was the weakness of this movement. I wouldn't say that it should have been an armed insurrection. That was not the mood of the people that was participating. But at the end, what the youth were confronting in the streets were not the police in Ukraine at the time of the insurrection of the people against the dictatorship in Ukraine, but they were fighting this civil insurrection against a kind of Taliban force that was decided to suppress this manifestation of rebellion, with bullets and without any mercy. This is the result. More than 400 people shot in the streets, thousands of people wounded, and an enormous repression that is still going on in the country.
I think Peter Reidon is next.
Yes, I was a reporter for the Norwegian Broadcasting at that time, and I met you up in the Matagalpa mountains in August '79, where you were organizing the local junta. It was a very informal atmosphere at that time. I was smoking cigars with Rubelo. I was having breakfast with Cardinal. I mean, I met anybody in any way I wanted. And maybe too informal, but I reported back at that time when I had seen you in Matagalpa and looking around. I reported back that I felt that you looked uncomfortable. Would you agree to that?
I really don't know.
I suppose the impression was perhaps that you did not feel like you were really in power, that there were other younger guys that were in power, those who had arms.
And you were 27.
Yeah.
7 years. And most of the people I saw were military around.
Yeah. Well, in the leadership of the revolution, I was the only civilian. I never used a military uniform because I didn't. I had the reason to have a military uniform. I was a civilian. I was an intellectual that were part of the leadership of the revolution. I never learned how to use an armor. Then it was me that was there. I believe that I am the same person always, a civilian and intellectual that trying to that the country has again a democratic system.
Okay. Somebody else, please.
Hello. I'm going to ask a question that maybe it's a bit out of place, but I think it's for me it's very important to ask because I think it's a question that my generation has asked as well. I grew up in Colombia, and the story that I was told about Nicaragua is very different. Many people in Colombia, including myself, our families do not come from a left-leaning politics. So we are told like the official story that they also teach in the schools in Colombia. We have been talked about Nicaragua as the same way that they have talked about Venezuela and Cuba. They say, this is what happened when you go left. This is what happened when you defy the US. This is what happens when you rebelled to authority. And this is something I also believed, because this is also that everyone told me, until I go to university and learn a bit more. But I am also ashamed to say that I did not really learn about what happened in Nicaragua until I was in Norway, and I met a lot of people that knew the whole story. So my question is, right now there is a gap between all of your experiences and my generation and younger generations. We are getting out of touch with history, with the past. We are getting so much information right now in the internet. From now with AI, there is a lot of fake stories. We are losing out of touch, or we are losing the free press. What can be done for people like me and the people that is from my generation to learn from this and to learn how to fight when authoritarianism unfortunately maybe becomes the rule again?
I think that was a very important question, and I think it's also true for many Latin Americans who have forgotten about the dreams you had in Nicaragua and what you intended to do. So, please.
Well, no, the revolution in Nicaragua triumphed in 1979. Those are now how many years? 60 years.
46 years, is it?
50 years, half a century. This is an enormous lot of time. There have been different generations, people in the world since then. We are in a different century now. And I think the revolution in Nicaragua was the last triumphant revolution in Latin America, in the history of Latin America. This is a very, very far away fact in our history now. It is difficult for young people to understand what happened then in Nicaragua. The ideas has changed. The vision of the world for many people has changed now. There are different focus of problems in the world, very different from the ones in Nicaragua. And it was some of the reasons why Nicaragua is so marginal in the public opinion in the world now, because you have the option of different conflicts in different parts of the world. I really don't know how for young people to understand what happened in Nicaragua so many years ago. Now that nobody thinks in the possibility of the triumph of a guerrilla movement, of armed revolutions in the continent. This is out of reality to think such a thing now.
The last attempt was actually in Colombia, and they also failed.
Yes. Also the opportunity for left-wing parties to come to power electorally in Latin America didn't exist in the last century. Now it is possible to have left-wing parties in government, like in Brazil, in Colombia, in Chile, in Uruguay.
Mexico.
That was not possible before.
I think we have time for one more question. So please.
Thank you. My name is Henrik Hovland. I found it very interesting, your comment on the Sandinista front prioritizing economic and social change and not focusing that much on building democratic systems or institutions. And I have a follow-up question regarding that. As a very young journalist, I think I was 19, I went to Nicaragua, like many here, went quite young. And I spent time with the Sandinistas, but I also spent time with the Contras in the north. And later, after the war, I spent time with the Recontras and the Recompas, who at that time, in the north, again, people who had operated against each other during the war. And to me, it seems the war was really sort of the defining moment. I mean, it destroyed the Sandinista experiment, the war. And I wonder, when I was, based on those experiences, to me it was very clear that the Sandinistas had not, first of all, the Contras had social support in the north. And it seems they had not, they did not understand the social, economic terrain in the north. Not only on the east coast regarding the religious groups among the ethnic minorities, but also among the small landholders in the north. Now, how did that come? I mean, first of all, do you agree that the Contras had a lot of social support? That's how they survived in the guerrilla warfare. And if you agree, why did that come about? I mean, why did not the Sandinistas know more about that part of the country?
Well, I would refer only one fact that for me is one of the explanations of this phenomenon. One of the points of the program of the Sandinist Front when we took power was land reform, and to give the land to peasants with legal titles of property. But for, I would say, ideological reasons, the Sandinist Front decided that the land wouldn't be handed to people, but would be retained under the name of the state and in the forms of cooperatives of service, and that the peasant will live in the cooperatives but not be the owners of the land, because it was a kind of petit bourgeois thing to give the peasants the land. That was a tremendous mistake, because the peasants were waiting for the land and didn't receive it. This was one thing. The other thing was that the revolution started to expropriate the land of Somozas and those people that were linked to the Somoza dictatorship. Then we went on landowners with big amount of land, and then the sum of peasants, the rich peasants, were affected by the land reform too. And then there was fear amidst the peasants to be the next the owner for little amount of land, and they started to be the chieftains of the contra forces. The first that the officials would say the first military leadership of the contra forces were officials of the National Guard of Somoza, but since it was at the beginning, but then were the peasants themselves which assumed this role of chieftain of the contra forces. Then what we had in Nicaragua was a peasant war, in which many contingents of peasants without land went to integrate the contra forces, and they have the support of their families in the north areas, especially in the area that comes to the Atlantic, the North Caribbean, to the South Caribbean, Matagalpa, Jinotega, and so on. They had an enormous base of support the Contras in those territories of Nicaragua. And then the revolution was very firm. It has an enormous support in the Pacific coast, but in the northern part of the country and the mountains, the Contra has an enormous popular force.
I think that is how far we get, but I would like to ask you one last question, and you have to be quite short in answering, because I think we are out of time now. But can you, in the end, just give a small reflection on, I asked Carlos Fernando Chamorro about being a journalist and being a politician. How about being a novelista and a politician? How did you combine that, and how do you see that today? This experience that you had as being part of the insurrection and the part of the new building of the country in Nicaragua, what kind of inspiration has that given you as a novelista, not only in this book, but also in general?
Well, I would say that I consider myself an engaged writer, a writer that has his eyes open to the reality of his country. I could be a writer without any political worries about Nicaragua. Perhaps I could live in Nicaragua without any political worries. But I am this kind of intellectual that doesn't silence itself about the problem of the country. And if you live under the dictatorship, you can ignore that you live under the dictatorship. A different thing is how to use your literary instrument for politics. How you combine, how you let reality come into your novels in political terms, because a novel is a construction in which there are different voices speaking at the same time. You have different ideologies participating in a book, different vision of the world, and you can't use a novel as a political instrument of propaganda, because then you are ruining the novel. You are putting an end to your literary effort. Then you have to be careful to separate both things without letting apart my own political conviction and my own political engagement. I am an engaged writer, and I try to be a first-class writer.
And I think you are. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming.